Hello everyone. It's been a while since I've made a video. I figure I have a little bit of time on my hands, and I'd like to discuss the state of Black Desert and the kind of current point that we are here towards the end of 2025. I kind of want to just discuss things. A lot of this is going to be my opinions. Whether or not people really agree or not, it's up to you. It's going to be a pretty low effort video, so don't expect anything crazy. It's just going to be me talking about my opinions and what I believe, kind of what we've ended up with here as far as the meta, the game modes. I'll try to discuss as much as I can, but like I said, it's going to be pretty low effort, so just going to bear with me. So for those that don't know about me, my in-game name is Loads of Money. I'm the GM of Digital and been doing PvP for quite a long time at this point. Played a ton of MMOs, tons of really just PvP games, and nothing really is quite like BDO, which is kind of why I'm making this video, just kind of going over, in my opinion, the state and in reality, kind of the slow decline over the past few years. I'm going to be going over quite a few topics, from node wars, both construction, occupation, sieges, guild decks, Arsha, Anon, War of the Roses, RBF, AOS, Guild League. I'll be touching a little bit on class balance, but to be honest, there's really not much to say about class balance. Either it's going to be there, your class is going to be good, you're going to love it, or your class is going to suck and you're going to hate it. It's really heavily opinionated, and it's kind of hard to give a true standing on it because it'll never be balanced. Similar to gearing, I'll go over it a little bit. Guilds and alliances, the meta, I'll go over a lot of that later on in the video. I kind of have a little bit of a script, so if it sounds like I'm reading from a script, kind of am, but not really. So a lot of it will definitely be guided on rails, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start with construction. And I really want to start really going by the negatives. So currently our node war system is construction and occupation. Right now we have the ability to change node wars based on whoever owns Medaya. And on NA, we're heavily focused on construction. Other regions might do occupation, they might do construction. But on NA, we primarily deal with construction. So I'm going to be talking about construction, some of the negatives here. Really, the biggest one that I can think of is 1 hour wars. So I don't have the exact time frame, but somewhere around 2024, we changed back to construction from purely occupation, but we didn't get back the original construction time, which was 2 hour node wars. And really, their excuse for giving us 1 hour wars was that there's a lot of fatigue, but most of the wars still ended under an hour for the most part. Most of the fights that went over that hour mark, really the reason they went over the hour mark was because for the most part the fights are very close, which means that they're fun in essence. Currently with the 1 hour node war, you're really put on rails as far as how much time you have to win, and it kind of turns into around the 30-40 minute mark. Either you know you're going to win, or guilds kind of realize that, hey, we're not going to win, so kind of turns into a bit of a clown show. So I think 1 hour wars is probably one of the worst moves that I would say BDO has made, strictly because there's always a hard time limit, but with the way that structures work, and construction specifically, flags only come up every 10 minutes. So for a real node war, you really only have 4 usable flags to make something happen, and it doesn't really give you too much time to think of any strategy or really much to kind of work from within an hour time frame. And I know it might seem like a lot, an hour, but once you get into these wars and you realize a lot of time is downtime due to the fact that There's a lot of traveling, regrouping. It's not really like pure action for an hour. Um, which kind of leads into another point as far as what I would say is easily the most notorious meta as far as Node Wars. Might be called something different on your region. Some people call it zombieing, ratting, termite, backdooring, whatever it might be. Essentially, it boils down to an enemy guild is jumping into your fort, doing damage to structures, dying, respawning, and doing it again without no intention of actually fighting player versus player. It's basically player versus structures. Um, and a lot of that has to do with, in my opinion, structures are way too weak. Uh, Especially so in capped wars, but I'll get onto caps and all that later. But structures are way too weak for their actual structures as far as soft structures, recovs, things of that nature. Um, and it's very susceptible to dying. The problem is we only have an hour. So at some point, in order to win, a lot of guilds rely on zombieing, ratting, termiting, backdooring, whatever you might say. It ends up being a necessity. At some point, you have to hit structures. You can't just fight outside of a base if you want to win the war. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that defense is really strong. Defense is probably the strongest it's ever been right now because you can have elephants in the base. Respawns are very low, 7 seconds, pretty much the entire war. You still have SOB, you still have the respawn, and though they've been nerfed over time, they're still there, they're still available. And really, flags on offense die very easily. On capped, a small 5 to 10 man can kill a flag in 30, 40 seconds. And the later in the war you start getting default respawns, 20 seconds. If you take a bad wipe, your flag's dead. And let's say you're winning and you have some structures dead. Next thing you know, they drop rebuild. You have a minute and a half to get back from your fort to their base to kill the rebuilds. And you have to consistently keep that pace. So with the way defense is designed right now, it's heavily incentivized to just play defense and to not move because a lot of the offensive tools like flags are a lot weaker now due to honestly many things: gear, power creep, really just a lot of different mechanics that have been added. And it's not really one necessarily easy solution to kind of combat this meta, as I think it'll always be strong. It's been strong since forever, as long as I know. And really there's no way to combat it. But I would say the biggest and probably something that people don't realize is that there's not a lot of macro or strategy that's involved in Node Wars nowadays compared to before. And a lot of it comes down to two things, in my opinion, which is what makes defense so strong. Is one, we have the weakest cannons have ever been since I've really been playing the game. They die very easy. They're a 5-minute cook time. The structures that they come out of are very easy to kill. And the amount of damage that they do to flame towers and huachas in the fort has been nerfed, I would say, easily 5 or 6 times within the past 2 years, 3 years alone. So it's kind of at a point where honestly cannons are basically there to stop taps rather than actually kill structures, because if you really want to kill an FT or a huacha, you're better off throwing bodies on it instead of, using a cannon and trying to defend a cannon and shoot. And this is the same across the board for all modes, and I'll mention it later on as well. Another downside really to construction, and this kind of plays part as just guilds as a whole, is that construction PvP relies heavily on individuals, leadership within guilds, to make it work, really. I know this topic has probably been beaten to death by people across the board, whether it comes to guild alliance size, guild sizes, alliances, and people really believe that killing guilds, and I'll go over this in more detail later, but there's a lot of pressure put on leadership in construction wars because at the end of the day, you need a shot caller, you need a defense team, you need cannoneers, assuming they're useful, you need a flex lead, and in a lot of these team fights, you need a cross-commer. You need someone knowledgeable to build, so you need people to really do a lot of back-end work in construction, and it is kind of like a job for some, and a lot of people don't really see the back end, but it's there, and it is a lot of work. Kind of besides that point, something else that I believe makes construction currently pretty bad is the border. So we've always had node war borders, which previously we had a little button on the top right of your screen where you could press and it would show like a red wall fully surrounding zones, and that would let you know, hey, you're in the zone, hey, you're not in the zone. Previously, like, the downside to dying out of zone was you couldn't spawn at your fort, and if you were too far from your flag, you'd have to spawn at town or whatever. So that was kind of like the only downside. Now, ever since they kind of changed Node Wars the first time, they made it so that if you're out of zone and you're not within the same region, you get basically instantly killed. And that in itself isn't necessarily the worst part. Instant dying definitely sucks, but you get max timer, which also sucks. But the biggest part is we don't have the button anymore. So without the button, you really don't know when you're stepping in and out of the zone. And a lot of the current construction meta bases are built within 10 to 20 meters of the out of zone spot because the way the node areas are cut. And because that's kind of how the bases are, and we have a really bad map layout. I don't know who's making the map designs or who's cutting the nodes the way they are. They obviously don't PvP and don't look at the zones with a good lens, because some node zones basically have a third of their area within towns, which means you can't build. One big example is if you look at Karudo, one of the bases on the very southeast is a very powerful base. It's on top of a mountain with out of zones, 3 out of zone borders basically surrounding the fort, and it's on top of a mountain. So you get instant killed as someone pushing that base if you step too far to the east, too far to the north, too far to the south. And then the west is a cliff face that falls straight down a hill. So bases like that make it basically, if you build there, you cannot lose. And I think it's terrible design, and really they need to look at the maps. They need to look at bringing back the button. I don't know what the technology is and how we lost it, but we lost the button to show the borders, which would help. I'm assuming when they recut all the regions, they had no clue how to fix the node war zone, so they just got rid of the button so that they didn't have to worry about redoing that. I'm assuming that's what happened. But really, we need it back. We need the button back. They need to relook at the node war zones and the way they cut them up, because I think they're terrible currently. Also, the way we rotate our nodes, it's not really on a time base, so it's not every 3 months we're getting Valencia Medalla for uncapped, and 3 months after that, Valencia Medalla are capped or whatever. Like, that's not how it works. It's just kind of randomly, which kind of ruins the fun. You have to really fight on the same nodes over and over and over. So really having them split and move the regions would be nice, at least on a more of a schedule, so that we know every 3 months, hey, we're going to get Calpheon Medalla for capped. Whatever, right? So that would be pretty nice. So those are kind of the negatives. There's a couple more things. I think one of the probably biggest things as far as that kind of feeds into the termite meta and a lot of this stuff is ball fighting doesn't really matter in Node Wars currently, outside of ego. So whenever you see guilds really just fighting in the open field, there's really not much going off of it, because at the end of the day, when you die in the Node War, most of the times you're back up in 7 seconds. So there's really not much to be gained to ball fighting outside of huge guild disparities where one guild's just way stronger and they kind of run them over. But when guilds are relatively close, getting a couple kills here and there doesn't really matter that much anymore. They're back up in 7 seconds and they're right back into the fight. Where before, when you died a lot, you had 30-second respawn sometimes 20 minutes into the war. And now 20 minutes into the war, assuming all of your recovs are up, well, you're back in 7 minutes. You're good to go. So I think that's kind of led to more guilds being willing to just int termite, zombie, whatever you want to say, into forts, because they know 7 seconds, you're back up. Who cares? And that's really just kind of the game's way of pushing, I guess, people being more active in the wars. Because I know previously, and I'll use Siege as an example, even though we'll get there later, is in many years ago when you died in a Siege, you were dead for 120 seconds. So it didn't matter whether you died 1 minute in the war or 3 hours in the war. When you died, you were dead for easily a minute to 2 minutes. So every single life you did, you thought about like, wow, I don't want to die, But now it's like, just die, go again. So some of those are really the negatives for construction. I'm trying not to go too far in tangents here. Try to keep it, because I'm not editing this. I'm really lazy. I'll go over some of the cons to construct, or I went over the cons. I'm going to go over some of the pros. Is at the end of the day, construction requires macro and strategy when it's working at its true form. And that's really what draws a lot of people to Node Wars. It's really a competitive, sort of ego-driven scene where you want to prove that you're a strong guild at the end of the day. You want to prove you're better than another guild. Any real competitive Node War guilds, any real Node War guilds want to prove that they're better than the guild they're fighting. And when you win, it's fun. When you lose, it could be fun. But what kind of kills a bit of the scene is that there's no competitive integrity anymore. There's a lack of ego. There's a lack of competition. And I think a lot of it comes down to not really Node Wars themselves, but kind of the game's state overall. One of the probably biggest flaws would be Decs being gone, but that's a whole nother topic. But construction wars are fun. When they work, they're fun. You remember the wars, you remember the close wars, you remember the ones that you win, you remember the ones that you lost. You remember the long 2-hour wars. You don't really remember the 10-minute ones, right? And it's one of the only forms of actual guild content in the game that, in my opinion, is fun. The game is very solo oriented. There's very little group content that's not weekly gated. And Node Wars are one of the few where it's, as long as your guild's dropping, you have something to do daily for the most part. So construction at its core, very ego, very competitive, requires thinking from your guild. It requires strategy, and it gives people a reason to be better, to push for something. That was kind of like always the goal for construction Node Wars, was you wanted better players, you wanted more gear, you wanted to be better so that you'd win. Really, at the end of the day, that's what it is. And we've gone through many different Node Wars styles, types, whether it be the lattice system or the hex system, whatever it was, and full 100-man Node Wars with pure uncapped to mix between cap, T1s, whatever it might be. those are gone, but we do have the new mode, Occupation. Um, Similar thing. I will say it's a lot different than Construction. So, kind of, I think one of the biggest things that separates Occupation and Construction is, personally for me, I think it's a for fun war style. So, for non competitive guilds, casual guilds, it's probably peak gameplay as far as just clicking a button, getting your guild into a war, and just boom, you're in there. There's not really much to think. You don't really need that much leadership. You don't really need that much back end. You just queue up and you're in. And it has its bonuses for that. Even hardcore guilds, competitive guilds, if they have an off day, or let's say they're missing a lot of their leadership, hey, they click the button. The guys are in the T1 Occupation War. Perfect, cool. It is what it is. And it could be fun. The mode could be fun. Like I said, it's not necessarily a competitive ego thing, but a lot of the downsides really stem from the game splitting us at 5. So currently, if there are 5 guilds that drop on, let's just say, Kama, it'll split the guilds into 3 and 2. So there'll be 3 on Kama, 2 on Calpheon. So instead of being more of like a large scale, really active fight, we get this weird segmented kind of split fight where, in my opinion, I think the split should be around 10. Once you hit that 10 mark, then split it into 5 and 5. 5 on Calpheon, 5 on Kama. And that kind of keeps the fight competitive, because what happens a lot of times in these splits is you'll get one really strong guild, one snipe, and then one like mid-tier guild, and that mid-tier guild just can't do anything to the strong guild. They just lose because the snipe isn't actually there. Or if you get 3 guilds that are very similar in strength and they're all fighting over one fort, what happens is kind of a standoff where guilds put their FTs and watches relatively close to the fort, and then they slowly creep them up to the one fort, and then next thing you know, you have 3 guilds within 50 meters of this fort in a triangle, all basically slowly chipping the fort down, getting a little kills here and there. You can't really dive because there's FTs and watches blasting you. And then fort gets down to 10%. All 3 guilds dive, and a guild prays that they get it, and then they get it, and then the other 2 guilds kind of rinse repeat, where they start hitting the fort. The guild that owns it kind of gets blasted down a bit, or sits on their half of their part of the triangle, and you keep repeating that over and over until the war randomly ends. Another downside of Occupation, it just ends. Sometimes you're in a good fight, couple guilds, and you're on the question mark fort, you're about to do a push, and you're 22 minutes in, fight just ends. Boom, there you go. And everybody just, okay, Occupation is done, and you just kind of log out for the day. So the RNG simulator and the standoff part, probably the 2 actual worst parts of Occupation. Splitting the region at 5 is just doesn't make sense, and I think if they upped it to 10, it'd be way better. I don't think there's really a solution to the standoff FT watch a simulator. That's kind of just part of the way the game mode is built around, and I don't think it'd be necessarily bad, assuming there was more than 3 guilds. It's kind of like a problem of 3 guilds, 2 guilds. When there's a lot of guilds, like what happens on T1s where there's like 20 guilds on a region, that's less of a problem because of the amount of guilds. But it's when you do the T2s, the uncapped, where you get smaller amount of guilds, where you still kind of run into the flaws of Occupation. But like I said, it's definitely an RBF style game mode. It's definitely good for fun casual guilds, which I think is a plus. It's very non-competitive for fun casual, getting people into kind of PvP, but you don't really learn the node war system at all. And I think the pluses of it, outside of that, obviously less leadership, because it's for fun. It's basically an RBF. And the fights kind of change daily because, you know, you don't really have to defend a fort per se. You can kind of just leave the fort, really. If you don't want to defend a fort, you don't have to. You just leave a guild, you leave a fort, and just go fight elsewhere. So sometimes you just end up fighting in the middle of nowhere on a flag, which could be fun. But, you know, that's really all I'll say about Occupation. I don't think it's a bad mode. I think it's been poorly kept, and they really should think about going back in and changing some of these things. You know, maybe make it so you can only have one FT if you don't own a fort, or, you know, make a radius around the flags where you can only place one FT, no Hwacha, or two FTs, no Hwacha around the flag. That way it gets rid of this like standoff flag gameplay. Make it so you can only put Hwachas around the fort, or I don't know. There's definitely something that can be done to it. The problem is we haven't had any changes to Occupation at all. So that's kind of why the game mode seems kind of bad. It's just because it hasn't had any maintenance. That's all I'll really say about Occupation. Getting to Siege. There's really a lot of negatives to Siege. I'm going to be honest with you. For one, Siege is an absolute laggy mess. Even on some regions, 1v1s, you lag. 2v2s, you lag. 3v3s, you lag. Anything above 3v3, you know, for being like the peak content and you really want to get a ton of guilds, super large scale, massive PvP, you get above 3v3s and oh my god, it just doesn't work. Game does not work. Please try again. You're stuck trying to get on your horse. Your weapons get put away. Input delay. Anybody who's been to one of these laggy sieges knows exactly what I'm talking about. They're terrible. They're not fun. Another thing about Siege, all of your knowledge in Siege doesn't really correlate that well to Node War knowledge, especially Occupation. There's nothing in Occupation that tells you how to Siege. Even for Node Wars, there's a good amount of stuff that you do learn, but there's a lot of things in Sieges that if you haven't done Siege before, you know, there's nothing that's going to teach you how to do it besides just going into the blender and just hoping to learn. You know, Balanos is different from the Calpheon, and the Calpheon is different from Valencia, and each region kind of has its own bases, way you play. There's just a lot of things that you kind of have to learn. Similar to Construction Node War, respawn timers are insanely powerful. You basically keep 7-second respawns for 4 hours if need be, and it makes defense incredibly strong, and the only way to break it are ballistas. So that puts a lot of pressure on ballistas where previously it was cannons, but now cannons are useless. Cannons, they don't kill FTs, they don't kill Hwachas. They stop tapping, I guess. So, but really, like, one guy inting into the fort can do the same thing. A lot of times your base will die before your FTs and Hwachas die, which I think is kind of going to show just how bad of a state cannons really are in. And a lot of that emphasis is put back on ballistas, which are 15-minute timers, so you know you only get a limited amount of them. Another problem with Siege, at least for high-end fights, and it's been like this for a while, similar to Construction again, jumping into forts and just dying is very powerful. For some reason we have, and I'll get to Castle in a moment, but we do have ways to mitigate horsing, and that's in Castle Siege. We have horse orbs for the castle owner, which basically create this big force field around the castle where no one besides the castle owner can use their horses peggy jump, double jump, basically the ability to bypass the gates. That's in the castle, and I don't understand why we don't have that for our own ability to build, both in Construction and in Siege. I think they should allow that orb to be built as like a buildable structure within Siege bases, because I think currently horsing into forts is way too strong, just overall. And kind of something I want to touch on is in a little bit as far as meta is horses in general, but horsing into forts way too strong, and kind of that orb is used to negate it for the castle, but castle's outdated. Castle is essentially too strong now. Gates don't matter. Before, when you killed gates, you got increased time and you got the ability to spawn at the gate. You no longer can spawn at the gate, and it doesn't increase time. All it does is just give you the ability to walk in and the ability to kill the orbs. The problem with the orbs is that orbs are too tanky. The orbs are probably twice as strong as a gate, maybe 3 times as strong as a gate, and you have to kill 6 of them. So you have to kill 2 when you kill the first gate, 2 when you kill the second gate, and then 2 at the very back of this. Basically every fort has 2, and a lot of these orbs, once you kill the first and second gate, the final orbs are they're basically in the base of the siege structures. So by the time you get to them, you might as well not even hit them because they're tankier than forts. So why would you ever go after them when you can just kill the fort instead? So they should really adjust. I mean, castle PvP is terrible. No one really wants to do castle PvP, especially if you can't horse and you can't spawn at the gate. So they need to create either gate spawns, make it so that you only need to kill 2 horse orbs or something to make castle not as powerful the way it is. Not even going to go over the dragon, which is the dumbest thing they ever added in the game. But the dragon, for people who've seen it, it's basically a flying FT that obliterates the field, and it's probably the most boring mechanic in the game. It's old school Ellie's that just knocked you around, except for this one's in the sky and it can't be killed, and even if you could kill it, it can spawn in 10 seconds, so why would you ever kill it? And it's just there. So I won't really go too much into that, but yeah, that's terrible. Fun parts of Siege, I mean, it's peak ego, peak competition. Not really so much in the past 2 years for NA, but when there was drama for Siege, even if you weren't a part of the Siege guilds, you knew about it. And that's really at the core part of it, what drives PvP. And really what we haven't had is ego. There's no competition. There's no shit talk. You know, really a lot of that has died, which has kind of killed both Siege, Open World, and Node Wars. There's no stake in the game. There's no stakes in the game. It's like a watered down, kid-friendly PvP session. A lot of that comes down to politics, sure, but the game doesn't help at all. You know, back in the day, you'd want to beat your most hated guild, and you'd beat them in a node war, and you'd shit talk them. Then you go to open world, and you'd fight them, and you'd shit talk them. Then you go to Siege, and you beat them, and you shit talk them. We don't have that anymore, and that's really what Siege was just peak ego, peak competition. You know, the fights weren't always there weekly, but when you did get them, you remembered them because most of the time they were ego or something. Siege has the most amount of moving pieces to it, has the most amount of really strategy. There's a lot of knowledge in Siege. There's a lot that you really have to do to win very close fights. You don't always see them, but you know, there's a lot of thinking really in Siege in comparison to Node Wars. And when it works, it's the best content in the game, really. Siege is probably the funnest content in the game. The problem is you get a good Siege 1 out of every like 50. And when you're talking weekly, that means you maybe get one really good Siege a year. And I think a lot of that comes down to really there's no competition, there's no ego, it's too friendly. And you can't even really blame the community because how do you build ego? How do you build competition when you don't interact really with players? You don't interact with other guilds. You can't deck them. You can't shit talk them. You'll get reported. You know, you can't really do much outside of super old, long-standing drama, really. There's really not much going on, you know, and a lot of that comes down to older players kind of keeping that drama going, which is good and bad, but um, you know, that's really what keeps that going. But yeah, Siege, it could be fun when it works. It's fun. It's large scale PvP. You know, it's back and forth. Ton of people. You know, people get to get a lot of kills and you know have fun and shot callers and leadership, and they get to have that you know driven kind of PvP where it's you know you're leading your guys around and you're trying to get some sort of win some way somehow, and you know you're really thinking. It requires a lot of moving pieces, and that's what makes Siege fun, to be honest. A lot of thinking, a lot of thought involved, a lot of strategy, a lot of for the real good sieges. There's a lot of prep work to it and making sure your guys know what you're doing, what's going on, you know. And yeah, I mean that's really all I gotta say about it. I'll kind of throw in the incentives of PvP, the money, the silver, or whatever. Like PvP in general right now, this is probably the best it's ever been as far as rewards across the board. Construction, occupation, sieges. Guys, you're getting paid. Everybody knows you're getting the bag when you win. When you lose, you're still getting a little bag, but everybody knows you're getting the bag. Let's be real. But despite that, it doesn't necessarily mean people are having fun with it, even though we have the incentives. But I mean, you can't complain about it. The incentives there. There's a lot of you guys that go bag mode, and you know you love it. So, Siege, obviously bag mode. And I've talked about it a bit, but guild decks. This is probably the most controversial. It depends on each individual, but really, at the end of the day, removing guild decks has kind of killed a lot of what made BDO BDO. They've tried to implement Arsha, and Anon, and while I think both channels are good in their own ways, nobody really uses them because the drop buff is worthless. In order for the actual buff to be worth, it needs to not be drop rate, it needs to be quantity. So instead of getting, I'm just going to make something up because I don't grind. Instead of getting 5 trash drops on a regular server with your loot scroll, if you were to run Arsha Anon or regular Arsha, instead of getting 5 trash buff or 5 trash drops, you should get 10, right? So you should double the trash drops rather than the rates, because most people nowadays, you can pop a bunch of scrolls and a bunch of nonsense and get within the rate, and who cares, right? Like, who really cares? I think dropping double the quantity would be a lot different. That would actually get players to think about going onto those channels, because what's going to happen is you're going to get griefed and it's not going to be worth it anyways. But at least if the quantity's there, you're like, well, I didn't get 2,000 trash drop, I got 4,000 or whatever the number is, right? I'm just using 2x as an example. But, you know, there's really no reason to use Arsha. There's no reason to use Arsha and Anon. And you can't even guild deck people. So you go into a spot you want to grind, which, by the way, there's like 40 grind spots. That's not even including all the channels and like all these different spots. You got to go into Elvia, out of Elvia, or whatever it might be. You know, with a new location in Adania, you're basically ungriefable because you just go into a hidden realm every hour. And yeah, it's kind of killed player interaction. You know, you kind of killed that ego driven PvP. You don't really have a reason to do anything. I mean, at the end of the day, most players do capped content, and you don't interact with anybody. You warlog, and a lot of that comes down to there's really not much to do. Before, you used to be able to go to a grind spot, whether you wanted to grind or not. You see, oh hey, X guild member is there. I'm going to drop a deck. If he's there in 10 minutes, we're going to fight it out. And if he wants to stay and fight, he can, or he can leave. And, you know, if he calls, what most likely happened was he called a friend or two. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to call my friends. And then, you know, it slowly escalates until either one side brought too many, or somebody got burnt out. One of the two. But that was fun because then those guys remember, oh yeah, I remember that guy. He came to my spot and he griefed me while I was grinding. You know, you don't have any of that anymore. And a lot of that, you know, that sort of dynamic would build and build and build where you would fight these same guilds over in the open world. And then eventually, you know what? These guys, they beat us in open world because, oh, they zerg us. You know, all the excuses they got made. Everybody said, oh, they only beat us because they had 10 times more. Oh, they only beat us because they zerged us. Or, oh, blah, 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 right? And then it would spill over into construction. And then that's when you got the ego, where 1v1, you versus X guild. And that's where the fun of the competition kind of came from. And then, you know, that built from construction to siege. And I feel like we're missing a lot of that. And a lot of that came down from really open world. Open world kind of built that initial taste of drama within, like, whether it was a player or a guild. And then you started looking at those players and guilds a little different, and now they're your enemy. And then you take it into Node War. And then from Node War, you take it into Siege. And then, you know, if you were friendly with another guild, you know, that guild would help you. And then that other guild would find someone to help them to fight another guild. And then that's when you came into alliances or whatever. And I don't think alliance is necessarily best for the game, but that's kind of just the way these sandbox open world, you know, games kind of develop, is, you know, you against them sort of mentality, which was fun. And I think without Decs and whatever, it's changed a lot of that. Because there's really not much to do. You know, you just log in, you do your wars, you log out. Unless you're a person that PvEs or grinds or whatever. But for the most part, PvP community, you log in, you log out. You do your wars, you log out. Especially with the meta, which I'll go over later. But yeah, that's what I think about Decs. You know, there's really no reason to log in because you can't just find some random guy grinding and gank him and hope his guild shows up. You know, you just, hey, you send a deck and their GM's online and he accepts it, cool. Or he's offline, it doesn't go through, or he has perma decline on, or whatever it might be, right? Dropping the deck mid-fight and boom, fun's over. That kind of leads me to War of the Roses. In my opinion, is the worst game design PvP mode in the game. Initially, I thought it was going to be a persistent open world Guild Wars 2 style world v world, Cyrodiil-esque mode on one channel, like OD1 basically, and it's just a permanent PvE PvP sort of mode. But that's not what it turned out to be. We got this terrible MOBA triple lane PvP with people horsing around and backdooring, and man, I've done War of the Roses quite a few times, and I just think it's the worst game mode. I'll try to go over some of the parts because I know there's a lot of people who haven't done it, who haven't led it, who haven't used the skills, seen the skills, looked at the map. So I'll try to break it down quickly because I think it's just terrible. So first, it's triple lane. You got 3 lanes. The lanes are massive. Okay, you're going from Kama Castle to Odie Castle, and really you're horsing so much across this map. A lot of it is if your horse dies, you're basically useless. You have to find these little like transparent wisp to get your horse back, or else you're miserable. The triple lane, I think, is too much. It needs to be 2 lanes or something, because it just incentivizes you just never PvPing. You just don't see people. It's 600 people, and a lot of times you're like, where the hell is everybody? Because I don't see anybody. So for a mode that's supposed to be a 300v300, and sometimes you're like horsing for 30 seconds and you don't see a single person, you see more NPCs than players, kind of shows just, I'm not going to go too far on it, but yeah, 3 lanes, terrible. Should be at most 2, maybe 1. Backdooring, horrible. I think you shouldn't be able to backdoor. So let's say you only own the first point on the map. You shouldn't be able to backdoor 5 points into the back line. You should only be able to go 1 point past the front line, essentially. Wherever the front line should be, you should only be able to back cap 1 behind. I think being able to cut off the entire thing by slowly having a plat just horse across the map, hit the NPC, wipe, go back again, do that for 30 minutes until you eventually kill it because it doesn't regen. The NPCs don't regen. The only way to regen is to use a skill that's on a cooldown. It's terrible design. Speaking of skills, one, the UI isn't intuitive. There's no way for you to learn how to do it beforehand. You just had to hop in. You get this big ass map. Most of them are useless, the skills. There's one skill that gives you like a UAV, but when you use it, it lets the other team know, hey, they use UAV, so you just put your counter UAV on top of the UAV, and it completely nullifies it because it says in game with a voice line, enemy has used such and such, and you're like, oh, they used it. Okay, I'll use my counter UAV, and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna use my UAV now, and then the other team's like, oh, never mind, I seen theirs. Terrible. Drop like a little ogre thing onto a backline to chip out some fucking random lane. You drop like a little griffin onto your furthest attack point. Doesn't really do much. Elephants, when they were broken, they were just ridiculous. Just literally bulldozing lanes with like 6 elephants. Terrible. The buffs have been nerfed, so I'm not really going to get on the buffs too much, but the buffs are there. Really, the only one that matters is the middle buff, which is very powerful. Lasts 10 minutes, 15 minutes, somewhere around there. I think it's 10 minutes, and it has like a 20-minute downtime-ish, so very strong BSR buff. Also respawns elephants if you take it, and like some other nonsense. You also have these like carriages and a couple other tools that basically all they're used for is people hop in them and AFK so they don't get kicked out. Especially a lot of the streamers, they just hop in and they just fucking don't do anything. They're just useless. The final boss currently, so for people that don't know, the final boss, because of all the PvE changes with like the AP changes they recently did when Adonia came out, you can completely ignore every single mechanic and you could just rush down the final boss. And if nobody's there to stop you and you just hit the boss, it'll probably die in like 5 minutes. So you can quite literally start War of the Roses, go straight to the boss, use your respawn on one of the final nodes, and just win War of the Roses in 5 minutes. Boom, you're done. So terrible mechanic. Obviously, same as the towers and the NPCs, they don't heal over time. Neither does the final boss. So that strategy is there. It's still there. I don't know if people are using it weekly because I don't do War of the Roses. It's terrible fucking game mode. Ton of buffs and respawns. Respawns are terrible. You have 2 options. You have the quick respawn and you have the long respawn. And it's not necessarily bad, but you're pretty much dead for like 30 seconds guaranteed every time. But the worst part is it's really because it's so damn big of a map and there's so little PvP that by the time you get across the map, you get dismounted by some bullshit archer that shoots you down off your horse because you're horsing for fucking 5 minutes to get across the map. And then there's some random little rat just sitting there on the road where your horse dies, boom, you're dead. And you're like, well, shit. I'll spawn the very far back in 30 seconds and I'll fly across the fucking map again. It's terrible. I hate War of the Roses. It's just a horrible game mode. It could be fun if they made it persistent, just constantly going. Maybe on like 2-hour cycles where every 2 hours just ended regardless or something. I don't know. Make it fun. I don't know. It's a terrible game mode. Last thing I'll really get into on it is Third Legion. Third Legion is fucking useless. There's no point for Third Legion. I guess the only thing is it prevents people from being gatekept from doing the mode. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. When it's actual like Third Legions and you want to take it seriously, you have to make a Discord. You have to get all of these randoms into your Discord. If you're the main guild, you have to get all of these randoms into your Discord. And what it comes down is you need another shot caller calling for your Third Legion because there's 3 fucking lanes. So you have, some extra person shot calling Third Legion from your guild because if you actually want to win, you need to get the random 200 bozos to actually do something. So you have your main guild doing something. You have 200 bozos that it's not 200 because you know damn well all 200 aren't looking at the roleplay chat or whatever the fuck it is to find your Discord's permalink to join your Discord. You get maybe like 50, 60 people if you're lucky. And, you just go from there. But Third Legion is useless. I think it should be 6 guilds that queue. 4 to 6 guilds that queue. It should be the top guilds. So That way, all of the people that are going are basically from a guild that's known, or even do like, I don't know, 10 guilds. The top two are the leaders, and then every guild after that gets 50 members they could send in. That way, you know you're getting human beings and not like fucking AI generated. I'm pretty sure half of Third Legion is AI generated accounts that the CMs and GMs just put in because they need people to fill the slots. I mean, that's the real thing. I know on NA for a while, not enough people were queuing, and we literally went. I want to say, I don't remember how many it was, but we definitely went a couple War of the Roses without a single fight. Like there was not enough guilds that queued up. So that should kind of tell you how good the game mode is. And then the GMs, they did some sort of War of the Roses event, and after months of no War of the Roses, somehow we got enough participants to do it. So I think they're AI generated accounts that fucking end up on the Third Legion. They're absolute useless, terrible game mode. Only good thing is the reward. There's going to be one strong guild and one really shit guild, so at least it ends in like 5-10 minutes because they rushed out the boss and you get paid like 4 to 6 bill. Like, wow. It's the best part about War of the Roses. But other than that, terrible fucking game mode. Enough of that. RBF could be fun. It's dead. I don't know why we just don't get. I don't know. There's so many MMOs out there that have these BGs or whatever you want to call it, forms of PvP, whether it be capture the flag or team deathmatch or like King of the Hill or whatever, right? And somehow we ended up with the worst variant RBF on the worst maps with, I don't know, we had DRs based on your HP and points that reduce your DR if you're near. Terrible. RBF, in theory, should be fun. Why don't they just copy other games? It's still on-demand PvP, but it's dead because of all the terrible maps that we have. We have Valencia, terrible. Shitty-ass circle thing, terrible. But I'm going to try to speed this up and make this a little quicker. AOS, actually a good mode. I think it's fine. My only gripe with AOS is, why is it seasonal? Make it permanent. If you want to have a quote-unquote season downtime, close it for a week or two, give people their rewards, open it back up after 2 weeks, and just keep doing that. We don't need 3 to 6 months of, hey guys, AOS isn't in season right now, so you have to do hardcore or guild league or whatever. Just make it, hey, we're gonna have a downtime of 1 to 2 weeks, you guys are good, we're gonna go through it, give the rewards and whatever, let it go. It's a good game mode. People like it, people enjoy it. Let people do it. Custom queues that they have, the little custom system where you can make your own lobbies, amazing. Nothing I really say about AOS besides that. Guild League, same thing with AOS. Why is it seasonal? Leave the shit open with AOS. If you're scared of the two competing with each other, AOS and Guild League, I would say the plus side to AOS is you can solo queue. Downside to Guild League is that you need guilds. So I think it's fine to have people queuing AOS when they can't do Guild League because let's say their G League team doesn't have enough people or whatever it may be. That's fine. Let people queue AOS and have them both at the same time. I do think that there should be 2 separate queues for Guild League when it's running. There should be the competitive Guild League, and then there should be the fuck around Guild League. They tried to make it I think in the last season where you can have up to 3 teams at the same time. It was really buggy, so we never got to use it that much. But basically, you can have Team A queuing. They get the main games that actually count for points. Then you have Team B and C that could potentially queue. The problem is the gear disparity and the guild strength ended up like killing it over time because I think guilds are a little too scared to go in there because at the end of the day, it's still ego is still supposed to be competitive. Like people want to go in there to win. Like if you're on the A team, quote unquote A team for your guild, you want to win. And I know it tilts people when they're fighting. I'll just use an example. If they have to fight the Pecco team, they have to fight the Digi team, they have to fight the BR team, they have to fight the Vaga team. And let's just say you're a weaker guild and nobody else is queuing, so you have to fight them over and over and over. And that's where I think the quote unquote for fun practice queue or whatever it might be should be there. When you're just getting absolutely manhandled by a real team. And then I think probably the biggest downside to Guild League is the fact that there's no custom queue. Why do we not have a custom queue like AOS? We already have the technology. AOS already has the custom lobby thing where you can just invite the people and run the game. Do that for Guild League. It'll allow fun in-houses. It'll allow fun, inner guild kind of drama where you're like, you guys aren't that good, blah, blah, blah. And then you end up making drama. Like, this is a way to allow that kind of like pseudo deck system where you're like, oh, well, bring your best 10. We'll bring ours and we'll do a custom queue in the G League and you end up fighting and, fun like that. And while you're doing that for the custom queue, give us 10v10, give us 15v15, and give us 20v20 for the custom queue. Whether or not that's the actual real G League queue that they use for the ranking system, whether it's 10v10, like I know that's our current one, let us have the custom queue, but the ability to make it 10v10, 15v15, 20v20. That's what I think. Other PvP game mode, hardcore, I didn't do it. I heard it was fucking terrible. I heard it was basically people just did it for the money. They were making money and they just log out and they do it next week and that was it. So I heard the rewards were really good, but the actual hardcore was terrible. That's pretty much it when it comes to PvP. I'll kind of go over a couple things that are not necessarily purely PvP, but they're kind of related to PvP. One's class balance. So first and foremost, guys, when it comes to class balance, it'll never be balanced. There will always be something that's meta. There will always be something that's broken. But I think it's up to the game to tweak that and adjust the viability of classes, the overpowered classes, tweak them down, bring some up. It's always necessary. Class balance will never be easy. What I will say right now is that because of the direction of the game, iframe classes and SA trading is just very powerful right now, especially with the nerfs to grabs, and over time the overall nerfs to slows has completely changed the pacing of the game and has made a lot of classes a lot more strong than they were previously, when you could be slowed by, let's say, 50%, or Zerker was just running out of nowhere at Lava Pierce with a grab. They missed it, boom, they have another good grab. Now without those, a lot of classes are really annoying and you can kind of see it, but that's just kind of how it's going to be when you're adjusting things. So I can't really say this is a good or a bad, but that's just kind of class balance as a whole. Gearing for PvP is the easiest it's ever been, especially to get into capped, which is what I would say most, at least in NA, most of the players participate in is capped. Very easy to get to a point. For uncapped, though, I actually think it's still too hard to get really high end, and a lot of it comes down to once you get to a certain point, you're in this like hamster wheel of crons, and you get to a point where you're hitting these like boring gains because you have Karazad, you're trying to go for deck, and you're trying to go for Nov, and you're trying to go for Oct, or whatever it might be for weapons, and it's just like, it's still too boring. And I think it's probably like the gear gap is still really high, and it's still pretty tough for lower end players to reach that because you're on a cron wheel, really. But I won't really comment too much on gearing. I mentioned it earlier, guild caps, guild alliance sizes. I don't know. I've been running 150 man guild for a while. The one thing I'll say is make it so that guilds can meet the cap with one guild, because right now the only reason a lot of alliances are there is because they need the two guilds to reach a 150. Why not just make it so one guild can go 150, and if two guilds wanted to combine for the alliance, they would do it because they needed to get members. So for example, digital right now, digital and Black Rose, we don't really, we function as one guild. So if it was just digital without Black Rose, those players would be fine. Like, it wouldn't change anything. Another example of this in the past was Cho Nation and Chomies. They were essentially Cho Nation, but they needed the separate guild for the plus 50 slots to reach 150. And I think they should just make it so that you can reach whatever the cap is, 150, without needing an alt guild. And I think probably the biggest thing when it comes to guild alliances, guild size, guild caps, or whatever, and there's like this notion that just because if you were to kill the alliance sizes, I know a lot of people mention this, like we should bring back 100 man, or even someone said 75 man. I've even heard 50 mans as cap guilds. And people always assume that, oh, so many more guilds will be made. And while I do think that some guilds will be made out of necessity for people to go places, that's not always the case. I think a lot of the reason why we don't have more guilds now is because at the end of the day, people have to run those guilds. And a lot of leadership burns out. So let's say we went from right now 150 to guilds were forced to go to 100 man. And let's say we had 10 guilds, right? You would get another 500 players if we went from 10 guilds with 150, and we told them they had to get rid of, 50 people. We'd get more guilds. We'd get 500 players back in the pool. However, that doesn't mean we'll get 5 guilds, because what happens is in order to get 5 guilds, you need to get 5 guilds worth of leadership. That means you need your shot caller, especially if you're a node war guild, you need your shot caller, which, guilds that have been fortunate enough to have 1 or 2 callers that have been around for years, you don't really understand the struggle of some of these guilds to kind of develop a shot caller and bring one up or get one for your guild. So, you need that. Then you need your cannon guys, you need your defense guys, you need, there's a lot of moving pieces that you need. So just because you have 500 people doesn't mean you'll have 5 guilds worth of leadership to run guilds. What will happen is people will try to fit into those other 10 guilds that are established, and they'll do their best to try to fit in, try to make themselves into those guilds, rather than try to be the people to make a new guild. Like you'll have more chances of people quitting the game than you'll probably run into a group of people being, yeah, we'll make the guild, we'll run one of those guilds. So, that's my take on that. I've heard this argument so many times beaten to a point, and a lot of it comes from people who have never ran a guild. And I think in theory it sounds cool, like let's go from 150 back to 100 and let's get 5 guilds worth of players back in the pool. But these are also people who've never ran a guild, never shot called, they've never done the politics, which I'll get to in a bit. They've never done all these things, and it's a job, guys. At the end of the day, it's annoying to do. Like nobody wants to do it, but you do it so that your guys can have fun. That's really all it is. So yeah, that's guilds, alliances, sizes. The meta, oh boy. I mean, metas have changed, guys. We've gone from wizards being these insane, like, unkillable machines to now they're just okay. But right now, I'll go over what we have right now. The rock meta, boulder meta, brick meta, whatever you want to call it. We're tanky as hell right now, guys. And as a shot caller myself, like, I don't mind dying instantly or never being killable. But what I will say is right now, because of Kara's ads, which I think were kind of a mistake, especially with crystals being easy to obtain, I'm going to go out on the limb and say every single uncapped war you do, at least a fourth of the guild is boulder. Sometimes probably up to half of a guild are going to be these unkillable boulders. Okay. And it's boring. There's a lack of micro and macro when it comes from a shot caller's perspective, because there's so many damn unkillable targets that, especially if you're, let's say, in a 70-man node war, and let's just say 25 people are boulders, that means you only have 45 people that are killable. And that's not even including, you have to account for, there's people doing defense. So you have 5 people out of your ball and on defense. You have some people doing cannon. So when you're ball fighting guild v guild, and it's basically 50 v 50 on a 75-man, 60 v 60, at least 20 of those 60 are going to be some unkillable boulder that you just have to ignore until the fight's over. and I think it's pretty bad for the game currently. I think on the inverse, one shot meta is a little too extreme because it makes certain classes pretty useless, especially those without on demand iframes. One of probably the biggest classes that I will say that will get punished the most, and I'm sure people are going to be like, good, are Shies. But at the end of the day, I'm not really going to go in Shy Bus. They're very powerful. I don't really know what you could do with it. You can make it a pure support healer class or something. I don't know. But it'll hurt the most. And most players are going to be like, good. Nobody likes Shies. But if the other guild has Shies and you don't because your guys hate playing the game because they die instantly, you're going to have problems. Another class that kind of is a big offender, just getting absolutely brutalized, is like Awakened Wizard in one-shot metas. You just die standing, and it just feels terrible. So, with that being said, I do think Pure Rock is probably worse than one-shot, but, you really don't want either the extreme. And I know we've been stuck in this boulder meta for a while. So I'm trying to think as far as how long it's been, but it's been a while, and we've had this boulder meta, and they've said that they're going to fix it, and they're trying to tweak the crystals and whatever. There's so many ways they can try to fix it, really. Remove some of the Land of Morning Light power creep with crystal defensives, our Hooms, Bitterness, get rid of those, make Bitterness only PvE, nerf some of the Hoom DR and evasion, nerf the DR crystals again, but the Jin versions as well. One of the more maybe controversial takes is just give every class a percent shred. Something that might work pretty well, and I think it's something that's sorry, I got a Discord notification. Hopefully you guys don't freak out, but something that might work is make it similar to FTs. So right now in Node Wars, FTs give you a shred, a DP shred, and it stacks. So what could be done is give each individual player the ability to stack DP shreds. So let's say you have one of these boulders who jumps into the middle of a guild of 50 people. Allow him to get 50 DP shreds on his bar. That way, these boulders, if they're getting hit by a ton of players, they'll die. But if there's only one or two players, they still feel unkillable, if that makes sense. So that might be a way to kind of combat this meta as far as people being unkillable. Because a lot of it has to do with people just feeling unkillable because they're in the middle of a guild and 10 people are hitting them and they're perfectly fine. But if you give them that flame tower effect where, let's say they got minus 20 DP from 10 people, all of a sudden you're minus 200 DP, and now you're thinking, okay, I'm really squishy now, and you just die. That might be a way to fix it, but, I think they need to definitely go into something as far as the meta. I don't want to get too deep into it, but those are my opinions on it. Another thing as far as meta is we have way too many caps. We have T1, T2, Balanos, Siege caps, and uncapped. They're all different. They all require different AP scaling from top to bottom. They're all completely different. They feel different. Some classes feel better in Balanos Siege than they feel in T2 caps, which it shouldn't be. It needs to be uniform. I'm not going to go too deep into it because this video is already over an hour. But, that's something they need to fix. I think it needs to be fixed and needs to be looked at. Make it uniform. Make it fun. Don't make it to where we feel like we're unkillable, but also don't make it feel like you just get one shot. Most people prefer if you catch somebody CC'd, they should die. But people want to be able to, if they get hit standing, they can at least move a little before they die. So there has to be a little in between where if you get CC'd, you should definitely die. If you are just diving in, you're standing up, you shouldn't die instantly. So there has to be a good in between. I'll kind of get into the PvP incentive. I went over it earlier. Silver wise, it's the best it's ever been, but player fun incentive is probably the worst it's ever been. Players don't really seem to be that involved in wanting to do PvP that much, and that's kind of why the game's been steadily declining. And you can't really tell because we have so many fishermen, but I know as far as some of the old players that have come back recently and they all quit within a couple months because there's nothing to do. There's no fun incentive to play. There's nothing keeping them active in the game. And that's what I mean by player incentive. There's nothing keeping you engaged in the game. There's nothing driving you to get gear, to get better, to sit in BA, to do whatever. You know, it's not there. But the silver value for winning node wars and sieges, best it's ever been. Now we just need to get away from players that actually have fun in the game so that they actually log in. Last thing I'll go into is politics. Oh man, this is strictly for NA. NA is purely politic driven. Drop and go node wars like it used to be back in the day, where you would look at the node war count and you'd be like, oh man, 3 guilds dropped. I'm gonna try to find a fort spot and drop and try to get some PvP. Hopefully, that's been dead for years, guys. It's not coming back. Maybe if we got like 30 men uncapped. People hate uncapped because of the rock meta. I'm gonna be real with you. It's just dead, guys. I don't know really what to say. I don't know if there's really a good way to do it. Politics are here and they're going to be here for the foreseeable future. So if you're one of those people who truly despise politics, there's T1s, there's the occupation version. And that's why I said it's very leadership friendly. It's very like casual guild friendly. There's always that option. So, politics here, but what a lot of people don't realize, especially in guilds, is you've got to really be careful what information you're taking from your leadership, because there is a lot of nonsense going on in the background in politic discords and politics within these leaderships that your guild will tell you one thing, your leadership will tell you one thing, but that's not really what's going on in the grand picture. Some guilds are kind of like trying to really dictate the perception that's kind of going, and that's just human nature, and you can't really do anything about that, but just take some things with a grain of salt, fellas. There's always another side to the story, especially in these BDL politics, that, guys, it's a fucking shit show behind the scenes. And you just kind of have to read between the lines sometimes and just understand that politics are always going to be here from now on. And some of it is nonsense, guys. You really just got to deal with that. So that's really it, guys. I've been going on for a little over an hour, and I'm not editing or doing anything crazy, so this is literally how it's going to be. I'll try to drop this at some point, and you guys can, if you have any comments or anything, you can leave them down below. You can message me in Discord. If you don't have my Discord, I'm sure you'll find it eventually. I'm not that hard to find. But thanks for listening, fellas. There might be timestamps, there might not be. I don't know. I don't do YouTube stuff, so that'll be it, fellas. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.